we need to do something different. And so I think that's one aspect to it, is the vulnerability and honesty with ourselves. But I think when we spread that vulnerability to sharing our stories with other people, that's when people feel less alone. And as humans, we're constantly trying to get validation from other people. I see it all the time.
First and foremost, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you for that wonderful bio.
Yeah, you like that? I cobbled that together today, and I was like, oh man, I went on your LinkedIn and I think Instagram, and I kind of just like took bits and pieces of a little thing, and
I love it. It was
yeah,
great.
thanks for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Hey, why is life great right now?
Why is life great right now? A couple of different reasons. And I love that you asked that question, first of all, because it really starts things on a positive note. I am really enjoying family right now. And for two reasons. One, I have a daughter that's going to be 3 here on January 5th. And it just is a constant reminder of how fast life goes. And watching her grow up and learn every day is so incredible. And it's just different watching a child from a parent perspective versus watching someone else's child. And then I have another child on the way in March. And so that's also another reminder that, life is going fast. Life changes constantly. And we just have to embrace those moments because it goes by so fast.
Yeah. Yeah, congratulations on that. I didn't know about
Thank you.
I didn't know that you were expecting.
Yeah, thank
so
you.
Congrats on that. And then happy 3-year anniversary on your podcast.
Thank
back
you.
in November, right?
Yes. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. Because I think I was a guest on your. We recorded last week, right? But I guess it on yours, and I think we were talking about at one point. There's a lot of podcasts that don't. There's a lot of podcasts, but then like 90% of them don't make it past episode 3, and then 90% of that, the ones who do make it past episode 3 don't go past 20. So, 3 years, and then I think you have 160 something episodes or something, right?
Yeah, I think it's 161. I was doing weekly. I think it was September, switched to every other week to kind of give myself some room to breathe. But it's been 3 years, and it's been 3 wonderful years, and I absolutely love it. So thank you for that.
No, that's cool. We were talking about something during last week whenever we recorded. And then I listened to I think you had a solo episode recently, but I'm curious, what's the driving point for transitioning to your podcast to a nonprofit model? Because is that something you're still entertaining for 2025?
It is. Yeah, it is. And so it's something that I have played around with in my mind for some time, probably over a year, honestly. And I think when you enter the world of podcasting, there's always these people out there, and like all the podcasting groups are like monetize, right? And it's an interesting conversation I've seen on mainly the Facebook podcast groups where people talk about monetization because it sparks this conversation where not everyone is in podcasting to make money. Some people podcast for hobby reasons. Some people podcast for passion projects. I'm one of those. And some people legitimately do podcasts to make money and or promote a business or service that they have. And so I kind of played around with a little bit of everything. And, podcasting does cost money or it costs time. I should say there's one or the other. For me, there's certain parts of podcasting that I don't enjoy. We talked about this too, like editing. And I also love supporting other people too in their business ventures. So if someone is better at something than me and I can support them and it helps me at the same time, then it's a win-win for everyone. And so anyway, I started kind of exploring, a couple different things. How can I at least break even every single month so that I am not spending my money on podcast editing constantly? B, how do I maximize my impact in the world of military mental health? Because I've come across a couple of different constraints since I started this advocacy platform. Your story doesn't end here. And then my other point just slipped my mind, but it'll come back to me. But the biggest thing here was the fact that realizing, I guess, that if I am not creating some kind of way for me to generate some kind of money to be able to give back, then it limits what I can do. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things that I do locally in my community. There are nationwide platforms that I would love to share more messages and stories on. There's more that I would love to do to get people's stories out there, but I'm currently just limited to what I have and what I bring in. The other piece that I was going to say is that I wanted to do something that feels right. And so to me, a for profit business model just never felt right. Coaching, high ticket sales. I mean, I think the things that a lot of people are exploring in the world right now, which works great for a lot of other people, just did not feel right to me. And I played around with so many different things, and I'm like, I just don't feel right taking my passion project and turning it into this full blown for profit business. And so it was actually my roommate at the Military Influencers Conference who really pushed me to start diving more into the nonprofit business model. And she runs a nonprofit herself, Sea Waves. And there's something she said that really stuck out to me. I think I was like getting ready to go to one of the millions of like breakouts or something for Mick. And she turns to me and she tells me that she's like, "You're very type B personality," which I know. I never really explored like personality types, but she's like, "I'm very type A, you're very type B personality." And then she looks at me and she said, "You would make a great CEO." And those words really stuck with me because I think for me, I have put myself in this box mentally for a really long time where I limited myself and I created this ceiling that didn't actually exist, but I felt like I had to stay down here instead of seeing myself as someone who could be at a CEO level like that. And so when she said that to me, and I'm like, CEO, like, what do you mean? And she's like, "Oh, CEO." She's like, "You should be CEO if you're a nonprofit." And I'm like, "Well, I don't even know where to start with this. Like, I don't want to be like a scammy person that's like, taking all the money from people and paying myself." And she's like, "No, no, no. Like, there's ways that you can make this work, and I think you'd be really good at it." And so I started really, really thinking about it and doing more research and exploring into nonprofit models and realizing that I can do a nonprofit where I'm not having to solve every problem in the military mental health space. I don't have to do the retreats and all the actionable things that other existing nonprofits are doing. And I think that a lot of people, when you say I want to go nonprofit, their first question is, "Are you sure you need to go nonprofit? Why don't you just join someone else's nonprofit? Or why don't you just support someone else's mission?" And what I found is really cool, even on my own podcast, is that there are nonprofits out there where their sole mission is to support other nonprofits that are doing the work. Because the biggest issue with a lot of these nonprofits in the US is funding. And so if I can generate funding in some way through my platform and just advocate and make people aware of these issues that exist in the military and veteran communities when it comes to mental health, then I can still do my part. To me, it feels good. I have the ability to give back and maximize the impact that I've wanted for so long to maximize. And it just felt a lot better than anything I had explored in the past. So yeah, that's still the plan moving forward. And it's a little scary because it's completely new to me, but I'm really excited about it and it feels good.
And I love it. You're right. Podcasting is expensive, both time and financially. I like you talking about the CEO. It made me think of it's like you're going to be the CEO, or people need to be the CEO of their own mental health.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I think so. I've listened to a couple episodes of your well, I say couple. It's probably been about 8 or 9 over the past like couple months because I learned about you like right before Mick, and then I saw you speak at Mick, and I love just kind of like your presence and your poise and your voice. We talked about that. Like you have a very some people have just have a great. I think there is truth to some people's voice. It draws people in, right? But and then just over the past couple months, I've just listened to like episodes driving to work and everything. But I think one of the things you're doing is with your podcast, it's personal growth through storytelling. And I hear it's whether about people sharing their own personal stories or you're encouraging people to share their struggles as part of a larger narrative. But how has and imagine with the 160 episodes over the past 3 years, you've just gotten better each time. But how do you think your own story has shaped your personal growth and perspective on resilience?
Yeah, so I look back at Rachel, who started Your Story Doesn't End Here, and I look at where I am now. And I tell people all the time, when I first started Your Story Doesn't End Here, it was out of pure rage, honestly. When I just left the military, September of 2021, I started my podcast. I launched it in November of 2021, and I was very angry and I was upset with a broken system. And so my thought process back then was, well, if I get enough of these stories out there, then people are going to hear what's really going on in the military and what people are really experiencing. They're going to be outraged. It's going to go to the Pentagon. It's going to go viral, and we're going to change the world.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not that simple. I still have aspirations to change the world because I think that's a good aspiration to have. But I also understand a little more now that everyone's kind of doing their part out there, and we can't take on every single problem in the world and expect that one person is going to be that catalyst. Even these people that we see as these like figureheads that we think are changing the world, they have so many people behind them or alongside them that are also doing their part. We just don't hear about them. We see the one figure person and we think, wow, that person did it themselves. And so, when I look at how much I have grown as a person, um, there's a lot of healing there. There's a lot of pain there. There was a lot of tough conversations there. Um, the journey is obviously still going. I don't think that ever really ends. I think we're constantly learning and growing as human beings on how our story is going to shape and I guess what our definition of resilience is as we learn more information and we learn more about ourselves and those around us. So, hearing other people's stories is always humbling. Um, but I think hearing other people's perspectives too what has been the most humbling for me, because I think in the beginning I really expected everyone to just have a negative story. And I remember there was a few guests that I had on that didn't have negative stories. I had one guest in particular who was like, I don't even speak of my story in that aspect because I don't let it define me. And it was so impactful to me to hear of people that have moved past that, right? Um, and to know that not everyone is living with that self identity of, well, this is what happened to me, whether prior to service, during the military, or after service. They're not letting that define them. And so, one other huge realization that I've had over the years is that it's okay to exist in a world where there's good and bad. It doesn't have to be so black and white. I think something that I see constantly, I live in a small town and there's a community Facebook page that like everyone's part of. And the poor Navy recruiter, bless his heart, he'll go on there like once a month and he'll be like, the Navy's hiring guys, got to get some people in. And he's great. I mean, this man, he's got some thick skin. I'll say that. But you always get like the disgruntled veterans on there, and you get the people who had bad experiences. You get the people that are just messing around, and then you get the few people that are like legitimately interested in joining the Navy. And he has to somehow sift through all those comments. And I remember there was one time that someone had said something about some really negative stuff, and I can't remember if it happened to them or if they were just kind of asking a general question about some negative things in the military. And a lot of people attacked that person and were like, well, I got great benefits in the military, and the military allowed me to go to college, and the military allowed me to do this and do that. And it really got my wheels turning and thinking like, man, I too had some really, really great experiences when I was in the military. I had some horrible experiences in the military. And for
Yeah.
the longest time, that's all I really focused on, because I think that that's like when I got together with my buddies at work, all we did was complain about like the horrible things, right? Like we didn't sit there and say, man, I'm really grateful for the fact that I have this job that's paying me like $6,000 a month to be here and do nothing for like the next hour. I mean, there was a shift when we just watched Gordon Ramsay all night,
Oh,
and like that's all we did for work, right? Like there's not a lot of jobs where you can do that. And like there were some really cool people that I got to serve with. I got to launch aircraft. As much as it sucks sometimes, washing aircraft is still pretty cool at times, right? There was a time when I like drove past people and I'm like, man, it'd be really cool to do that. Getting to be inside a plane that is decommissioning here in like a couple of months and will be no more. There's experiences that I had in my life in the military that most people will never get to experience. And when I see things on Facebook where people think it's just black and white, or just in general, or people think it's just black and white, it makes me realize, well, no, we can exist in a world where, yeah, I hated a lot of my experiences, but I also loved a lot of my experiences. And it's okay to acknowledge both. And I don't have to just have one feeling towards my service. So, kind of a long winded answer to your question, but there's been a lot of growth, honestly, in the last 3 years and from a couple of different angles.
no, that's because I was going to ask you, like, how important is it for us to evolve and how we grow and tell our stories? But I think you answered that just with our mindset, because people do just want to kind of dwell in the negative stuff, and maybe sometimes that's okay, right? Because there's certain
Yeah.
things, but there's so many positive things. And I was a guest on a podcast a couple days ago, and so I'm retiring in May. And when I retire from the military, it'd be 23 years, and like I joined because of 9/11. And during the podcast, the host asked me like, "Hey, what are some of your favorite memories?" And I was like, "I can't just pinpoint one because there's been some bad things, but God, there's been so many good things." I called it like Slumdog Million. Have you seen the movie Slumdog Millionaire?
It's been a while.
Yeah, I mean, because it came out like
Yeah.
'09 or 2010
Yeah.
or something like that. But the whole point of the movie is, when he's going on the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire show, and every time he's asked a question, he has like this flashback in life to like a pivotal moment. But that's what it's like for me in the military. There's been so many things where I look back and it just kind of puts that smile on your face, whether it's watching, I've worked night shift or mid shift, and we've watched, we didn't watch Gordon Ramsay, but we used to watch a lot of Key and Peele. And I mean, just there's so many different things. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so why do you believe vulnerability is such a powerful tool um, in the healing process for both the storyteller and the listener?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of people, I would say, I would be bold enough to say that majority of the people that walk around the world are not living in their authenticity.
Mm,
And I don't know statistics, obviously. I don't know numbers. I couldn't for sure say, yeah, 90% of the people aren't living their authentic selves. But I think the more that I study into human behavior, just study watching like YouTube videos like impact theory and people that will like study body language and stuff. I think psychology is fascinating to me. When you look at most people and different sectors of their life and you kind of watch people grow and evolve, and you kind of look at the trends that are going on in the world and what people are doing with that and have conversations with people, and you just kind of look at that big picture of it, a lot of people aren't being vulnerable. And there's different reasons for that. Some people have been burned by vulnerability. There's always a chance that someone could come back with really any of my podcast episodes and use that against me. I think we see that in mainstream media all the time. Someone will take someone's vulnerability, they'll twist it, they'll chop it up, they'll make it sound a certain way, and they'll use it against them. And so there's always a risk with that. And so from that basic survival mode, rightfully so, people don't want to be vulnerable, especially in public platforms or if there's not some kind of built up trust there. I think vulnerability is important for ourselves, because if we're not being honest with ourselves, how we do one thing is how we do everything. That's something that's stuck with me since I heard it. And if we're not being honest with ourselves, then we're not being honest with anyone else. And so that's the first place that I think it's important to start, is the most difficult place. And I think it's so hard to do, as simple as it sounds, is to just be honest and vulnerable with yourself. For the longest time, I thought that I was a person that I wasn't. I had created this image in my head of this persona that I wanted to be, but my actions in life were not actually lining up with that person. And so from the outside in, everyone's like, man, like Rachel's doing all these things and this is amazing. And but meanwhile, like internally in my home life and like, my environment, everything's like a cluttered mess. And I wasn't being vulnerable enough with myself to sit down and say, like, listen, we need to figure something out. We need to do something different. And so I think that's one aspect to it, is the vulnerability and honesty with ourselves. But I think when we spread that vulnerability to sharing our stories with other people, that's when people feel less alone. And
Mm-hmm.
as humans, we're constantly trying to get validation from other people. Um, I see it all the time. I'm the president of a 240 plus home community with a lot of older people and some military in it. And it's really interesting seeing the older generation of people who don't appreciate vulnerability. And I think that's a generational thing. Like, not to bring generations into it and compare
Yeah.
generations, but I think if we look back into the generation, like the boomer generation or Gen X, and we see that, like, from a cultural standpoint, and not just in America, but in a lot of places across the world, there's certain things that you just don't speak on. You don't speak about it. Mental health is a huge one. And it obviously stems into this whole conversation of stigma and all these other things, right? But if people would just take the time to be a little bit more vulnerable and be honest, then I think that shifts the culture bit by bit. And I think it changes people's lives, because when I can relate to someone, because I'm not creating a story in my head of what I think their life is actually like, then I feel less alone. And now I feel like it's okay for me to be a little bit more vulnerable. One really incredible example that I absolutely love is I was sitting down with one of the ladies who was running for commissioner in my area, and we were sitting down for lunch. And I asked her, "How are you today?" And she didn't say good. She gave me this long-winded answer that was very vulnerable. I think it was realistically probably the third time that I ever actually had a conversation with her. But she was very honest with me about, some really personal things going on in her life. And I really appreciated that. It's not like she talked my ear off for like half an hour going into like a therapy session, but I loved that instead of saying, good, and then moving on with the conversation, it was, well, to be honest with you, like, this is really tough for me right now, and I'm going through this and this and that. And it allowed me the opportunity, when I'm asked, how are you today, in the right situation, in the right scenario. I'm not going to sit there at the grocery line and hold up everyone behind me sharing my entire life story, but to be a little bit more vulnerable in certain situations. And if I'm honestly not having a good day, saying, it's not the greatest day, and being okay with that. And so I think there's power in personal vulnerability, which is where it starts. But then I also think if we can be more vulnerable with others, it allows other people the opportunity to feel less alone and to be more vulnerable themselves.
That's a great. So we'll kind of go into that a little bit, but why do you think people just go a little bit deeper? But what's your advice, or what's a specific action that people can take, or what advice do you have for people who feel hesitant or afraid to share their own story? Because I know, and I felt like sometimes people they self limit, like it's not traumatic enough or a hardship enough, so they feel like they can't bother people. But yeah, just kind of like, what's your advice for people who feel hesitant?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to do. There's even times still when I'm on podcasts and there's parts of my story that I think I've healed from, and it catches me off guard, where I'm like, man, like I wasn't ready for that. One example, when I was on Kevin Hines's podcast, he started getting into childhood stuff with me. And I thought I was ready for that conversation, but it was so weird the way that my body physically reacted to that conversation. And I still have yet to go back and watch the episode because to be completely honest with you, I'm a little scared to go back and watch it because
Yeah.
I feel like for a little bit there, I actually like blacked out and just wasn't even like thinking about what was going on. But I, as much as I want to like be like, please take the episode down, let's do it over. That's a period of my growth, right? And it's important to have stuff like that out there because the best way to overcome that personal vulnerability is to start sharing your story. And maybe not always on a personal platform. Maybe it starts with journaling. Maybe it starts with, I talk to myself constantly. I'll be in the car and sometimes my daughter's in the back, sometimes I'm by myself and I'm just talking to myself. Some people might see it as crazy. I don't. I see it as a form of personal therapy.
I
Some
do
people
that
need
too,
a,
so I'm glad to hear you say that. So we're not
yeah,
weird. And think about now we have the advantage of cell phones and Bluetooth, but there was a time where we didn't have that. So
yeah,
people did like they'd see you at a stoplight. So thanks for admitting that because that's a
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways, and if the more you can speak on something, the less painful it becomes. And it's not that the pain ever goes away, because if something horrific happens to you in your life, that horrific event itself isn't going to go away. But if we just ignore it and act like it doesn't exist and hope that we can move on with our lives, your body still is going to remember what happened there. And so, I think that everyone's healing and getting past that, like, how do I share my story? I think it looks a little different. And so it's really not a black and white answer of what's going to be the number one best thing to do. You have to find what works for you. Some people it is writing, some people it's speaking, some people it is, going to a therapist and talking to that third party and hearing that third party perspective. But if you're an internalized person and you just need to go on a drive and talk to yourself for an hour, nothing wrong with that.
God, that's so good. I love that, Rachel. That's cool. It's to me, it's whether like to your point or points, it's whether it's writing or talking to yourself in the car. It's a path to empowerment. Is how my takeaway from
Yeah.
that. Totally random. Uh, did I tell you about how I used to read the Inquirer a lot as a kid? I think when we,
I don't think so.
yeah. So it's a whole separate story. But growing up, well, just a quickly summary. My mom, she's German, so she learned to speak English by she moved to America with my dad. Obviously, they were married. Moved to Oklahoma, where he got stationed in 1981. So that's how my mom learned to speak English was by watching American soap operas and reading the National Enquirer. But so all even into adulthood, my whole life I was always reading the National Enquirer. But long story short, there was something about, and this is really before like the iPhone and all that. I was reading a story. It was either about Cameron Diaz or Jenny McCarthy, but they were talking about oh no, they did have a. This is before Bluetooth, but cell phones were a thing. But they would pretend to be talking on their cell phone, but they were just talking to themselves in the car.
Yeah.
They just didn't want to seem weird. But anyway, it made me
Yeah.
think of that.
Yeah.
All right, I want to just go in a different direction. Some lighter questions. Um, no real rhyme or reason. It's just
Go for it.
whatever, right? All right, so September 2021, your last day in the Navy. If you could time travel and go back and just like I'm imagine just like in the Air Force, we have our admin building. You turn in, you have your final out appointment. So Rachel has her final out appointment. You're waiting outside for her. 2021 version of you.
Mhm.
You see yourself. What do you tell the 2021 version of yourself as soon as they walk out of the Navy admin building?
Yeah, so I would probably tell myself what I tell other veterans or active duty military that's separating, and it's be kind to yourself because the first few weeks out of the military are a little rough mentally. And someone explained it to me so well. And I always share this analogy with every single person that I meet that is separating from the military. And it's that when we separate from the military, it is a chemical change in our brain. When you're active duty, you're constantly reaching for something. It's a dopamine rush every single day of your life. What new rank can I reach? What awards can I get? What collaterals can I pick up? How can I be better? How can I be better? And obviously that's not everyone in the military. There's some dirt bags that are just there to do their 4 years. I can't call them all dirt bags. There are some dirt bags in the military, but there are
Yeah.
some people that, they have a very set plan and they know I'm going to do my 4 years. I'm going to get my GI Bill. I'm going to
Yeah.
get out, go to school, whatever. Right. And even then, 4 years of your life is a long time, and you still get that chemical change in 4 years, right? Because it's constant dopamine every single month, every year, every day. I mean, as much as I wanted to say that I didn't care when I was in the military, every time results came out for a new rank, I was still sitting there like, did I make E4? Did I make E5? And it was a slight disappointment if I didn't make it. Even if, like, on the outside, I was like, I don't care. I'm just going to be an E3 forever. And I think we see that a lot. But it's that change, it's that chemical change that happens where we go from this constant rush of dopamine to nothing. And I wasn't ready for that. And I had such a high expectation of myself when I separated from the military because I had this idea that I would get out and everything would be smooth sailing from there. And so I just didn't allow myself mentally that time to just be kinder to myself and understand that life is going to do what life wants to do, even if we think we have a plan. Um, and so, yeah, if there's one thing that I could say to myself, it would be that.
No, it's perfect. It lines up with the quote I had to open the episode: "Give yourself
Yeah.
grace and don't give up on yourself." I have to remind myself that because I'm very tough on myself. Also, life be lifing. So,
You're not wrong.
all right. Here's another random question: which historical figure do you most identify with?
Ooh, that's a deep one.
Hmm.
I don't even know if I know the answer to that question, to be completely honest with you.
It could be fictional or nonfiction.
Um, can we go to the next question and I'll think on this one for a
Yeah,
little bit?
and
Because
just
I
shout it
have
out as
no
soon as you
idea.
think it. Like even if you're like in the middle of another sentence and you're like,
Yeah,
"Bah,"
I have
just
no idea.
Cameron Diaz.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if I'd see that as a historical figure,
no, no,
but
no. I know. Just
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
just something random. In the
yeah.
last 5 years, what new belief or behavior has most improved your life? Actually, we'll say in the past 3 years since you got out in September of 2021.
Yeah. So this is actually pretty recent for me. Coaching. Coaching has changed a lot of my behaviors for me, and so I know coaching itself isn't a belief or behavior, but what has come out of working with a coach has created several behaviors that have been really, really life changing for me. And I say recent, I'm on like week 5 of working with my coach right now. And coach that I've worked with in the past, and she was the very first coach that I've ever actually worked with. And I went back to her because I had some pretty crappy coaching experiences in the last year or two with people that just weren't good fits for me, and they had a toxic coaching approach for what I needed. And so a couple of the behaviors that I really wanted to change, I felt very stagnant. And I've talked about this a few times on my podcast. I felt very stagnant really since I left the military because I've been trying to figure out what is going to be the next thing in my life. Like, what do I do now? And I think a lot of veterans are in that place. And it's really hard to just know what's the next step for you. Some vets get out and they try to go back to what they did before. I didn't really have that option um, because I don't even live in the same state that I lived in before I joined the military. The one job that I had that I really loved before I joined the military, that whole branch shut down. I wouldn't want to live there anyway. I love Iowa as home. I will never live there again. The Midwest is just not my place for long term living. So, that just wasn't an option for me. And so, I felt this stagnation. And how do you move out of stagnation is the golden question that I had in my mind.
Hmm.
And I tried so many different things based off of YouTube videos and what other people are doing. And a lot of people's answer is, we'll just do it. Okay, well, how do you do that? And
Yeah.
so what I really loved about the coach that I'm working
Is
with is
that it?
right, right. And for some people that works. So if that works for you, by all means. But I think a lot of the behaviors that I had created in my life really went back a long time, some of them to childhood. And so my coach has been working with me to kind of break down into more bite-sized pieces things that work better. So instead of, let's create a whole gym routine, let's just focus on body movement every single day. And then learning in that process that body movement looks different every single day. Sometimes it feels better to move my body in the morning. Some days it feels better in the afternoon or the evening. And
Is this
there's
as a result of your
fluidity.
Bell's palsy? Sorry to cut you off, but is this a
No, you're good.
result? It was you have Bell's palsy or something? Is that
I
right?
did. Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes.
saved.
Yes, I
You
did.
posted something about that a couple weeks ago, and I saved that on my phone, uh,
Yeah.
um, because I'm very scared of getting that or that happening to me, and it seems like it's happening not all the time, but to more and more people. So when you said, body movement and like I have a friend, she is a high energetic person,
Mhm.
very I mean, just a charismatic person, and she was in a leadership position, and yeah, she got it on her face, and she
Mhm.
couldn't smile, and it's
Yeah,
just
stress can cause that
mhm.
for sure. It wasn't necessarily a result of my Bell's palsy because that was actually a 2021 2022 thing. Um, I'll I'll shift to that here in a second if you're okay with that. But the
Yeah,
coaching stuff
yeah.
specifically was just focusing on like small behaviors that are going to help me get out of the stagnation. And so I would say behavior wise, it's moving out of that stagnation. And so what can I do to do that? If it's, body movement every single day and just focusing on not necessarily the activity itself, but the overall thing that I'm trying to accomplish, which is just moving my body, which sometimes can be playing with my daughter. Sometimes it can be a workout. Drinking water every single day, something that I often forget to do, as crazy as that sounds. Things like, taking time to have intentional mornings, which I've really been loving lately, and just listening to either like a meditation in the morning or doing some breath work in the morning or, whatever works for me. And so just really giving myself time to focus on what I need to change these small habits that are going to stick instead of trying to do this like crazy thing like a 75 hard, which I've tried to do several times, and like overwhelming my brain with just too much change all at once. And so that's that behavior thing that has been really life changing for me so far. Um, when you talked about like the stagnation piece in my Bell's palsy, was interesting is when I first got Bell's palsy because it really happened overnight. Um, one of the things that came to mind is that I talked earlier about how the body will manifest what is happening mentally. The body remembers. And I think that when I got out of the military, I was so overwhelmed with everything and I felt so stuck that I truly believe that manifested into my physical body. And someone actually brought that up to me, and I thought that it was a really interesting way, and it helped me kind of put into perspective, okay, well, what do I need to do next? And I don't want to say that solved all my issues, and that was like a really life-changing moment for me, but yeah, I mean, when you think of all the stress and the stuckness that can come out of life not going the way that we want life to go, because that's really what happened to me. I mean, I got out of the military expecting to go to nursing school and finishing that and then having this great nursing career and life would be good. While I was pregnant, I dropped out of nursing school and I really felt like I just had nothing. Like I felt like, what next? What now? And I felt so stuck for a while. And I feel like that was a huge piece to it. Um, when I got diagnosed with Bell's palsy, what they do, they don't really have an actual cure for it. They can give you, what's it called? Valacyclovir, because they think that it might be something that's viral. It's the same stuff they give you for like cold sores. Um, and then they can give you a steroid injection. And I declined both because I was literally heading into my last like 2, 3 weeks of pregnancy. And it was very important to me when I was pregnant to not take medications if they weren't absolutely necessary. And I didn't feel like that was absolutely necessary for me. And I felt like it could do more harm to my baby.
Yeah.
And so I chose not to do so. What they'll tell you if you get Bell's palsy and you go to the doctor is that, oh, it'll clear up in 2 weeks. It's been 3 years and it still isn't fully cleared up for me. And I don't even know, because they'll tell you even with the medication that it's not a guarantee that it will clear up. They give you the medication and they hope for the best. And they're like, well, some people will have it clear up all the way, some people won't. I'm super grateful that I can move my face again, because when I tell you, like at the worst of it, I could not blink. My eye, it was this side of my face, my right side of my face, could not blink my right eye. I could not move that side of my mouth at all. I still feel nerve damage from it. And what's interesting is I started to notice some muscle damage, I guess would be the right word, and other parts of my body too. Like I was
Yeah.
trying to hold up like the number 3 with my daughter the other day. And when I try to like hold up 3 with my right hand as opposed to my left hand, it's harder for me to do. Or like moving my toes on the right side of my body is harder for me to do. And so um, there's still a little bit of that there. But I feel like a lot of that honestly did come from just mentally feeling stagnant, and then all that stress just piling up and attacking my body. And I think at the end of the day, although they don't really fully know what causes Bell's palsy, yes, pregnancy can be a factor, but I know stress is also a huge factor. I had a guest on my podcast who lost, um, he got paralyzed on the entire side of his body, and his was fully stress related. And so it is definitely something that can happen to anyone. But I would say that for someone that was very cognizant of not wanting that to happen to them, taking care of your mental health would probably be a huge place to start, and then managing stress.
Man, love it. Hey, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate
Absolutely.
just the transparency. You really are an open book, an open
I
story.
try to be.
You are really are. Um, all right, last question. If there was a giant billboard with your picture on it for the world to see, where would you want that billboard to be? And what would you want your billboard to say?
Hmm. Where would I want it to be? That's a good question. Um, I would probably want it to be on a military base, because that's the audience that I speak to. And I would probably want it to have my favorite quote on it, which is every sunset eventually leads to sunrise. You just have to survive the night. And just as a reminder that we're not where we are forever, sometimes you just have to make it through. And I think that inspiration is most needed in places where you're not seeing a lot of inspiration, i.e., military bases. You see a lot of propaganda for like re-enlist and activities and stuff that are going on, but you don't see a lot of motivational stuff, which I think is kind of wild now that I talk about it. Um, but I think that's needed. And I don't know that my face would necessarily need to be on it, but at least to have some kind of motivational quote or inspiration for our military, I think would be really impactful. So any specific base, I don't know. I don't even know all the bases, but a military base somewhere.
Nah, perfect. I love it. That's a fantastic answer. No, maybe instead of your face, maybe it could just be a speaker, and it's just playing a constant recording of your voice, just reciting the message.
Oh man, that'd be like SEER school, where apparently they listen to that same song over and
Oh,
over and over.
really? I didn't know
I
that.
think I've heard. Well, I've never been to SEER school,
Yeah,
but apparently there's a song that they listen to over and over and over when they're in like their. I probably don't call it a torture chamber, but they're
yeah.
obviously learning how to be prisoners of war, and they listen to the same thing over
The
and over.
fun
And it's
house.
actually supposed to be a form of torture, listening to the same song over and over and over. So I don't know that that would be helpful, but you know, maybe like a couple times a day or something.
Nah. Hey, Rachel, thank you so much for being on my show. I appreciate your time. Do you have any parting shots or parting thoughts?
Well, I still couldn't think of any historical figures. So if I think of one, I might just have to shoot you like I
Do
am
it.
completely drawing a blank on that.
You're gonna think
But if
about it
I
at like 2 o'clock in it, like 2 a.m. You're gonna be like, I need to message Martin. Like,
I know. And I think part of it is that I just haven't like dug into historical figures in such a long time. And I learn more about historical figures now that are like different than what I learned as a kid. And so, not everyone is who history made them seem.
yeah,
And so that's kind of a deep question, but I will think on that and I will get back to you on that maybe after doing some research and then you can like post it on Instagram or something as like an addition to this episode. But no, I'm really appreciative of podcasts like this where I can have a conversation about things in my life or share some value with other people and um, really just kind of expand my own perspective. I think what's really cool for me about being a guest on other people's shows is that it forces me to think more about myself and then also share a little bit of my own story too. So thank you first of all for the opportunity to be on this platform. Um, and thank you for what you do in getting other people on your platform too. I love the fact that you are still military and doing this because it's not easy. I don't know that
yeah,
I would have been able to podcast and be active duty at the same time. So a lot of respect for what you do.
thank you.
But for some final parting words for anyone that's listening to this podcast, it's the end of December right now when we're recording, and I've been seeing just a lot on Facebook about people struggling and whether they're posting anonymously on Facebook and saying, "Hey, this is my last Christmas," or someone just reaching out for help, or I've actually seen a lot of stories about people taking their lives, accidents happening. As much as this can be a really wonderful time of year at the end of the year and the turn of a new year, for a lot of people, it isn't. And so I would say just to remember that and reach out to people if you're in the space where you can reach out to people. We're not always in that space because sometimes we're struggling with our own stuff. But at the end of the day, take care of you, and whatever that looks like for you, just do it, even if you think it's weird. Try something new, take care of yourself, reach out for help if you need to, but please do not struggle alone, and know that you're not alone.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was great.